Hello, my name is Silke Andreas. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of Klagenfurt in the southern part of Austria. And I am an expert on communication, theory, skills, and performances. So you have learned in Unit 4 leadership a lot about social entrepreneurship, motivation, identity and reflection, but also about person-centered care and its importance in a community-based context. However, the previous contents referred mainly to one's own person. Nevertheless, a social entrepreneur is rarely alone on his way. Usually there is a team of employees which you have to lead. This unit is about the different ways to lead a team and its employees. The unit focuses on different styles of leadership, the importance of communication and communication skills and resilience. And at the end of this unit, you will be able to demonstrate awareness of the principles of leading a team, including values-driven leadership and how to inspire passion and commitment, demonstrate awareness of different communication styles, including the principles of effective verbal and non-verbal communication and the importance of listening skills, and understand the importance of maintaining own well-being and personal motivation, resilience. And the unit contents are about the leadership styles, communication skills and resilience. And now we will go forward and come to the main course of today, about the communication skills. First, I would like to give you an introduction. In the last section, we learned that it is important to have a suitable leadership style, especially the democratic and transformational leadership style seem to be a good solution to lead a team. These leadership styles emphasize a specific component: communication. Whether between boss and employee or mental health professional and patient, communication and communication skills are very important. In this section you will learn why the communication is so important and what you have to consider while a conversation. To work practically and to facilitate the transfer into everyday life, the contents relate to the doctor-patient interaction. As a doctor, you should be able to talk even under difficult conditions with people, for example with patients who are in a deep depression episode. It is necessary to develop a human and viable work alliance via the communication. This working alliance is the foundation of the successful medical treatment. The majority of treatment of patients with mental disorders take place via direct communication. Accordingly, the ability for a good communication to patient is learnable. As you can see, in some cases is communication not that easy. Communication is very important and deficits in communication can have negative consequences. Deficits in communication lead to only about half of the complaints and concerns of the patient are taken up by the doctor. The physician perceives only a small amount of the emotional or social influences on the problem of the patient. Information be conveyed in an inflexible manner without taking into account the individual needs of patients. The doctor rarely ensured whether the patients have actually understood him. Mental illnesses are detected less frequently, decrease of patient compliance, and patients are dissatisfied. Good communication, on the other hand, leads to doctors detect precisely the problem of their patients. Patients can better understand their problem, their diagnosis and treatment. Compliance increase, which has a significant effect on the success of treatment. Decrease of fear and uncertainty in patients, increase willingness to cooperate in patients, increase of patient satisfaction. Doctors are less prone to stress-related disorders, for example, burnout. What are the basics of communication? This is an activity. Influences on the communication. The type of communication is influenced by the perception of the person. Here are some points that may affect the perception and communication. Construction of reality. Previous experience and learning influence our perception and representation of the world. Momentary moods influence our perception, how everything changes when you have just fallen in love or has fallen through an important examination. But there are perception errors. Some examples you can see here on the slide. The first, the halo effect, overexposure. The halo effect is a cognitive bias in which our judgments of a person's character can be influenced by our overall impression of them. For example, if a chef is famous for making one particular dish, then the halo effect allows people to assume that he can cook anything with equal proficiency. The next effect, serial position effect. When people hear a reasonable long list of unrelated words and are asked immediately to recall them in any order, there is a strikingly similar pattern in the words that they remember. Words at the end of the list tend to be remembered well, recency effect, as do those at the beginning, primacy effect. The next effect is a contrast error. A rating error, there, for example, an employee is rated either higher or lower because of comparison with an employee who was just evaluated. And last but not least, the similarity error, a rating error where, for example, an appraiser inflates an employee's ratings based upon personal mutual connections or similarities. Other effects are about stigmatization and self-fulfilling prophecy. Stigmatization is about the diagnosis of patients can change the perception of their words, and self-fulfilling prophecy is described as the process by which one's expectations about a person eventually lead that person to behave in ways that confirm those expectations. These are the phenomena of communication, and now we are going forward to the theories of communication. How can we explain how communication is functioning? So first we go back to the very basics of communication, and a very famous psychologist described 5 axioms, Václavic. And Paul Václavic was a psychologist and communication theorist and coined the theory of communication. He developed a communication theory that is based on 5 axioms. Václavic and colleagues described that communication is more than just an information transfer. In fact, is communication and interaction. The 5 axioms are: first, one cannot not communicate. Václavic assumed that they are always at any time communicating with someone. When I argue with my partner and do not talk to him anymore, I am still communicating in the context of this axiom. Indeed, the silence is the end of the conversation, but not the end of communication. With the silence, I transfer information such as "I am angry." Another example, without saying a word and with his head down, a patient goes past the nurse. Without words, the patient may say, "I feel bad, please talk to me," or "I want to be alone, please remain silent." The second axiom is about every communication has a content and relationship aspect such that the latter classifies the former and is therefore a meta-communication. According to this axiom is any communication on two levels. The first level describes the content aspect, which is the information itself. The second level describes the relationship aspect. This is how you transfer a message: relationship, content. This level provides information about the relationship between the sender and the receiver. By the choice of words, tone of voice, facial expressions, gesture and posture, the sender gives some indication of how he feels to the receiver at this moment. Usually, this information is sent and received unconsciously. Therefore, here often arise conflicts. After this axiom, it is not possible to communicate without relationship aspects. The third axiom is the nature of a relationship is dependent on the punctuation of the partner's communication procedures. This axiom reflects the chicken and egg problem and describes the problem of cause and effect. Each person shapes the communicative situation so that it consists of individual events. On every single event follows a reaction. For example, a person is offended because person B always retreats, but person B retreats because person A is always so offended. The only way out is meta-communication. Fourth axiom. Human communication involves both digital and analogic modalities. Václavic differentiates analog, nonverbal, and digital verbal communication. For example, if a person does not understand something, she can digitally communicate by saying, "I did not understand what you mean," or analog by phones. The fifth axiom. Interhuman communication procedures are either symmetric or complementary, depending on whether the relationship of the partners is based on differences or parity. Václavic describes two types of interaction, the symmetric and complementary interaction. The type of interaction depends on the relationship. If the relationship is based on equality, persons will use a symmetrical interaction. This type of interaction is characterized by the pursuit of equality. On the other hand, the complementary interaction is based on complementary differences. Another theory is about the four sides model. The four-side model or communication square is probably the most famous and very widespread model by Friedemann Schulz von Thun. The model is also well known as the 4 ears model. Everything we say is effective in 4 ways. In other words, each of our utterances has 4 messages simultaneously. Factual information, facts and data, appeal, what the sender wants to happen, self-revelation, what the sender reveals about themselves, motives, values, emotions, and relationship, what the sender thinks of the receiver. Therefore, Schulz von Thun integrated in his model the 4 sides of an utterance represented as a square. The sender has 4 mouths and the receiver has 4 ears. From a psychological perspective, if we talk to each other, we have 4 mouths and 4 ears. The quality of the conversation depends on the manner in which they interact. factual information. Here the factual information is in the foreground. Therefore, it is necessary to transfer the facts clear and understandable to the receiver. An example. So, Mrs. Muller, you should take one of these tablets per day. The facts are clear here. Appeal. If someone begins to speak to another person, mostly he wants to get somewhere with him. Overtly or covertly, this level involves requests, appeals, instructions, effects, etc. The appeal ear is received ready for the question, what should I do now, think or feel? Some example, tell me, Mr. Winter, don't you think that it's cold here inside? Possible interpretation, maybe Mr. Summer said this to Mr. Winter because he freezes and he wants that Mr. Winter close the window. Self-revelation. When I talk to someone, I give information how I think about the person by wording, intonation and body language, at least with respect on the current topic of conversation. Thus, in every utterance, there is a note about the relationship. Generally, the receivers have a good ear for these notes. Because of the third ear, the receiver decided, what does the sender think about me? One example, oh, Mr. Schultz, don't make such a fuss. The side effects could not be so hard. Possible interpretation, the doctors think that the patient is restive. Relationship. If someone says something, he also informs about himself. Each utterance contains a self-declaration, whether intentionally or unintentionally. This is an indication of what is going on inside me, what I stand for and how I conceive my role. This may happen overtly as an I message or rather covered. This circumstance makes each message to a small taste of personality. While the sender reveals information about himself with his self-declaration mouth, overtly or covertly, the receiver accepts the message with the self-declaration ear. What does this tell me about the sender? How does he feel, etc. Some example. Oh, doctor, my grandchildren miss me so. Possible interpretation, the patient feels alone. So another activity for you. And now we come to a skill of communication, listening. Active listening is an important skill for each communication relationship. However, especially in mental health care, it is necessary to have good listening skills to build a trusting relationship to the patient. With the help of active listening, the doctor may capture the inner experience of a patient, his feelings and his desires. The general basis of listening is to hear the patient out, to make breaks, to sustain breaks, and to give actively signals that you are listening. It is important to take an accepting attitude. Carl Rogers, also a very famous and important psychologist, and one of the founders of the humanistic approach to psychology, describes the basic attitudes of a therapist in the humanistic approach. These attitudes can also help in normal conversations. And he postulated that it is important to be congruent, to have an empathic understanding, and to be in an unconditional positive regard. First, the congruence. The doctor should be as he are. Feelings that come up in conversation should not necessarily be suppressed or hidden. You should be aware of your own feelings. Only then it is possible to respond appropriately and to address the perceived feelings related to the relationship to the patient. The physician should be congruently, that means with himself, in harmony. As soon as a physician builds a defense attitude towards the patient's person, he is incongruent. Unconditional positive regard. Esteem is a real positive interest in others and the simultaneous abandonment of value judgments, advice and teachings. The relationship between doctor and patient is characterized by respect, interest and human warmth of acceptance. The patient should be accepted as an independent human being, even if he is regressing in therapy or even the behavior is not consistent with the expectations of the practitioner. Empathic understanding. An empathic understanding, in particular with regard to the feelings of the patient, is very important. Empathy is the ability to think oneself into the world of feelings of another person without identifying with it. Empathy is very important to get an access to the patient, and it helps to increase the therapeutic collaboration for the entire course of treatment. Active listening regarding social enterprise. These variables are also very important in the communication between you as a leader and your employees. Congruence. In every way you should be authentic. If you are not, you cannot build a true, inspiring and trusting relationship. Unconditional positive regard. With an unconditional positive regard, you can build trust. If your employees trust you, problems be solved constructively. And empathic understanding. This is also necessary to build trust, the real comprehension. It allows you to see the problems through the eyes of your employees. Communication is the most important medium in the interaction between people. Especially active listening is something that cannot be taken for granted today. It is so important because only with active listening your partner can be heard. These three variables, regardless whether in clinical or corporate context, are indispensable. They are the small 1+1 of communication and the basis of the verbal exchange. If you are a leader of a company and if you have employees gathered around, it is very important to listen to them and to communicate in a constructive and empathic level with them. If you are doing this, they build a trusting relationship and they will be more successful in their activities. Speaking spontaneously. Up to this point, we heard something about the importance of good communication, communication theories and the ability to listen. Nevertheless, we do not know how to implement this knowledge in practice. Maybe you are nervous when you should speak in front of a big audience, for example in front of your employees. Maybe you are a good speaker when you can prepare your presentation. But how does it look like with spontaneous speeches? Another activity for you. So you have now learned about spontaneously communication, and now I would like to explain nonverbal communication. Your face speaks clearly of what you are hitting. As we have learned from the axioms of Watzlawick, there is a verbal, digital and nonverbal analog communication. Sani Molho, an expert of body language, describes that about 80% of our communication is nonverbal. We receive nonverbal signals, for example, about the facial expressions, gestures and postures, as well as the proximity and distance, pupil size or sense of touch or sense of smell. Here, most of the communication takes place unconsciously. Overall, the non-verbal communication is divided into 3 different types: unconscious nonverbal communication, part conscious nonverbal communication, and conscious nonverbal communication. Unconscious nonverbal communication. Many signals we perceive are below the threshold of consciousness. For example, a fire, the composition of the air before a thunderstorm, or sexual messengers of the body we only perceive subconsciously. Nevertheless, these perceptions influence our feelings and our behaviors. The reason for this is our brainstem. The brainstem is an important control element for our autonomous functions. Often we are gripped by the fear or insecurity without knowing the reason. In this case, our body perceived something unconsciously, what was processed in the brainstem. Even in direct communication, we are ready to receive unconscious signals. For example, we perceive the smell and minimal gestures and facial expressions of our communication partner. Part conscious nonverbal communication. Some signals of the body take place partly conscious. It may be that we perceive certain changes in our facial expressions, but the majority is unconscious and cannot be consciously used for communication. Other autonomous body functions, such as perspiration, pupil chains, or pulse, can we perceive from other persons, but not consciously control. This means that although we may recognize them under certain circumstances, we cannot control them consciously. Conscious nonverbal communication. The prime example of nonverbal communication is sign language, but even as an accompaniment of verbal communication, we can communicate nonverbally. For example, we can consciously emphasize the spoken word with arms and legs, postures, or specific facial expressions. Laugh, blindfold, raising eyebrows. Please watch the video now. But what is now about the communication in a social enterprise? You can see communication as a good meal. We have just presented to you the recipe, the individual ingredients, the 4 sides: active listening, nonverbal communication. We have told you what you can do wrong when cooking, influences on communication. And we have shown to you how to sweeten the dish, speaking spontaneously. For all these elements, you can mix the best communication you know. Only the mixture makes a difference. In dealing with your employees, it is important to consider all these elements. You have to listen carefully, but have also to consider all 4 sides of the message, and you have to communicate non-verbally. Do not be fooled by the influences of communication. Once you have found the perfect mixture, your employees and your company will thank you. Only with a good communication and a good cohesion you can lead a social enterprise successful. All your employees are working to find solutions to social problems. They want to do it together with you. Work together and communicative to social problems. So here you can see a summary of the main points of these sections. Deficits in communication lead to several problems. For example, decrease of patient compliance. Patients are dissatisfied. Good communication leads, for example, to decrease of fear in patients and increase of patient satisfaction. The type of communication is influenced by the perception of the persons. For example, self-fulfilling prophecy. Paul Watzlawick describes 5 axioms of communication. One cannot not communicate. Every communication has a content and relationship aspect such that the latter classifies the former and is therefore a meta-communication. The nature of a relationship is dependent on the punctuation of the partner's communication procedures. Human communication involves both digital and analogic modalities. Interhuman communication procedures are either symmetric or complementary, depending on whether the relationship of the partners is based on differences or parity. The four-side model or communication square is probably the most famous. Each of our utterances have 4 messages simultaneously. Factual information, facts and data, appeal, what the sender wants to happen, self-revelation, what the sender reveals about themselves, motives, values, emotions, relationship, what the sender thinks of the receiver. The basic attitudes of a therapist in the humanistic approach can improve conversation: congruence, unconditional positive regard, empathic understanding. About 80% of our communication is nonverbal. The nonverbal communication is divided into 3 different types: unconscious nonverbal communication, part-conscious nonverbal communication, and conscious nonverbal communication. So, what you have learned in this section, you learned something about the importance of good communication and some points that may affect the perception of communication. You heard something about basic communication theories like Watzlawick's 5 axioms and the 4 sides model. You learned also something about active listening and how to speak spontaneously, as well as the importance of nonverbal communication. So, I'm at the end of this unit communication, and I wish you all the best for the other units in the comment project. Thank you for taking part.